All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving headfirst into a really unsettling case: the life and crimes of Dennis Nilsen, infamously known as the Muswell Hill murderer.
A case that, as our source material highlights, isn't just about the horrific killings themselves, but the fact that he managed to live this seemingly ordinary life while committing them.
Yeah, we're going way beyond the surface here.
Using this true crime audio episode to unpack how Nilsen stayed under the radar for so long, the twisted psychology behind his actions.
And the chilling impact his crimes continue to have, even today.
It's a story that sticks with you, that's for sure.
Absolutely. 15 suspected murders over several years, and he just vanished into the
It's
background.
almost unbelievable, right?
It begs the question, how is that even possible? How do you commit such horrific acts and just blend in?
Well, a big part of it, and something that's really unsettling, is the vulnerability of his victims.
Right, we're talking about young men, often homeless, kind of living on the fringes of society.
Exactly. And sadly, their disappearances didn't raise the alarm bells they should have.
Yeah. It's a chilling thought.
It is.
Our source points out that only 3 out of those 15 were ever officially reported missing.
That's a really stark statistic.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to a really tragic reality.
Absolutely.
The most marginalized members of our society, the ones who are often overlooked.
They become the most vulnerable to predators like Nilsen.
Like their lives are somehow less important, less noticed.
It's a horrifying thought, but it's a reality we have to confront.
Nilsen himself, and this is just bone-chilling, in this Guardian article we have here,
Yeah.
he's quoted as saying that he specifically targeted young, homeless, down-and-out homosexuals.
It's like he was preying on those who were already marginalized, already invisible to a certain extent.
Almost like he was counting on it.
Sadly, it seems that way.
You know, there's this one quote from The Guardian that really sent chills down my spine when I read it.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Nobody knew or even suspected, because Nilsen not only possessed all the trappings of a thoroughly normal suburban life, he was positively dreary, the least eye-catching man in the crowd. I mean, it's like his ordinariness was a weapon.
Camouflaging him in plain sight.
Makes you wonder how many other potential dangers we're overlooking every day simply because they don't fit the image we have in our minds of what a criminal looks like.
It's a really uncomfortable thought, isn't it? That evil can wear such a normal face.
It's a thought that keeps me up at night, honestly.
And speaking of unsettling things, can we talk about the sheer horror of his flat at 23 Cranley Gardens?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just the fact that a routine plumbing issue
Yeah.
led to the discovery of all those bodies.
It's the kind of thing you just can't make up, like a scene straight out of a nightmare.
Absolutely. And once the full extent of what happened at Cranley Gardens came to light, Nilsen was charged with 6 murders and 2 attempted murders.
And his defense was, well, diminished responsibility.
Which is basically saying that a mental disorder impaired his judgment and actions.
Right, he was hoping for manslaughter convictions instead of murder.
Yeah, it's a fascinating legal tactic that brings up so many questions about personal accountability.
Absolutely. Where do we draw the line between genuine mental illness and criminal intent? It's a question that's often debated, particularly in cases like this.
Especially when you consider the impact his actions had on the survivors who testified at his trial.
Right, their testimonies are just heartbreaking. They add such a human dimension to this whole case.
We have Douglas Stewart, who actually managed to fight Nilsen off, but when he initially reported the incident to the police, it was dismissed.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and then you have Paul Nobbs, who was absolutely terrified while he was on the stand.
And the defense tried to paint this picture of Nilsen as a caring friend.
It's just mind-boggling, right?
Okay.
And we can't forget about Carl Stodder, whose testimony was really central to the prosecution's case.
So many lives impacted, so much trauma.
It's just awful. And then you have Nilsen's own words to consider. In his unscrambling behavior statement, he wrote, "I was in a quasi-godlike role. I thought I could do anything I wanted. While this was going on, there were people upstairs and people next door, and nobody knew."
I mean, that's a chilling glimpse into his psyche.
But can we really trust those words?
Right, were they genuine self-reflection or just a calculated attempt to manipulate how people saw him?
Yeah, it's a question that's really hard to answer.
Especially when you consider the conflicting opinions of the psychiatrists involved in the case.
Right. You have Dr. James McKith, who diagnosed Nilsen with a severe personality disorder and depersonalization.
A feeling of detachment from yourself and reality, essentially.
And then you have Dr. Patrick Gorway, who put forward this theory of false self syndrome and arrested development.
Suggesting that Nilsen created this persona to conceal his true fragmented self.
But then the prosecution's psychiatrist, Dr. Paul Bowen, completely rejects those diagnoses.
Yeah, he suggests that Nilsen's motives were all about power and trying to bury his guilt about his homosexuality.
It's a real clash of professional opinions, and it forces us to confront this fundamental question.
How do we accurately assess someone's mental state, especially in the context of such horrific crimes?
Where do we draw the line between genuine mental illness and calculated evil?
Those are some heavy questions to grapple with, and we're only just scratching the surface of this case.
Nilsen's story is like a labyrinth. Every twist and turn reveals another layer of complexity, another unsettling truth.
It's what makes this case so compelling, so disturbing, and so important to examine. I mean, it just goes to show you how complex the human mind really is.
It really does.
You have all these experts, these highly trained professionals,
Right.
reaching completely different conclusions about the same person.
And it really makes you question what we can really know about someone, especially someone capable of such horrific acts.
It's a humbling thought, for sure.
Yeah. And what's even more perplexing is that Nilsen's story just keeps unfolding, even after his conviction,
Right.
in ways that are both disturbing and fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Take his life in prison, for example.
Yeah.
Initially, he was completely isolated from other inmates.
Makes sense.
But then, he was attacked by another inmate,
Oh, wow.
which left him with a facial scar.
So even in prison, he wasn't safe from violence?
No, not at all. But despite that, he actually managed to form some relationships with other inmates.
Really?
Yeah, he even started a curry business with one of them.
Wait, a curry business?
I know, it sounds strange.
In prison?
Yeah, but it just shows you that even in the most restrictive environments,
Right.
life, with all its complexities and contradictions, finds a way.
It's a good reminder that we're not just dealing with case files and psychological profiles here.
Exactly.
These are real people with their own stories and experiences.
And Nilsen, despite his crimes, did attempt to engage with that human element.
In what way?
Well, he campaigned for gay rights. And he also corresponded with the LGBTQ magazine, Gay Times.
So he was trying to connect with the community, even from behind bars.
It seems that way, which brings up this whole question of redemption. Can someone who has committed such heinous acts ever truly be redeemed?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries.
And there are no easy answers.
But it's definitely something to consider as we delve deeper into the, shall we say, afterlife of Nilsen's story.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And part of that afterlife is the controversy surrounding Bry Master's book, Killing for Company.
Oh, right. Some people felt like it was giving Nilsen a platform he didn't deserve.
Exactly, while others saw it as a valuable exploration of his psychology.
It's a tough one, for sure.
And then there's the tragic case of Stephen Dean Holmes, who was finally identified as Nilsen's first victim years later.
It's hard to even imagine the pain his family must have gone through.
Finally getting some closure after all those years.
But also having those old wounds ripped open.
It just underscores how far-reaching the impact of these crimes can be.
Absolutely. The victims' families carry that pain with them, often for the rest of their lives.
It's a heavy burden to bear.
And that brings us to another layer of controversy. Nilsen's attempts to publish his autobiography, History of a Drowning Boy.
Which led to all sorts of legal battles and ethical debates.
It was a whole saga.
It really raises the question, should someone like Nilsen have the right to tell his story, to potentially even profit from his crimes?
It's a moral maze, isn't it?
Where do we draw the line?
On one hand, you have Carl Stoddard, one of the survivors, who was completely against the publication.
Right, he didn't want Nilsen to have that platform, that voice.
But then you have Shane Levine, the son of victim Graham Allen, who actually supported the publication.
He said he wanted to understand, to get closer to the truth, however painful it might be.
Two very different perspectives, both born out of loss and trauma.
It just shows you how complex these situations can be.
There are no easy answers, no one-size-fits-all solutions.
And then you have journalist Russ Coffey's book, Nilsen, Conversations with Britain's Most Evil Serial Killer.
Which includes excerpts from Nilsen's own writings.
Right, but Coffey himself is pretty skeptical about Nilsen's self-reporting.
Yeah, he calls him a vile sex criminal with a distorted mind.
Which brings us back to that whole question of, can we really trust anything Nilsen says?
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle when half the pieces are missing.
And the ones you do have might be from a completely different puzzle.
Exactly. And that ambiguity extends to this 2012 parliamentary debate about whole life tariffs.
Wait, Nilsen's case was discussed in Parliament?
Believe it or not, yes.
That's wild.
And here's where it gets really interesting. They pointed to his Braille transcription work in prison.
He did Braille transcription.
Yeah, he actually transcribed over 87 books for blind children.
Wow.
And they used that as an argument both for and against his continued imprisonment.
So even in this legal context, his story defied easy categorization.
Exactly, which I think speaks to the enduring power of this case. It forces us to confront these really uncomfortable questions about human
The
nature.
nature of justice and the limits of what we can truly know about another person.
And all of that complexity is wrapped up in a seemingly ordinary life.
It's just mind-boggling.
It really is.
So ultimately, Nilsen died in prison in 2018.
From a ruptured aortic aneurysm.
Right, and he had actually refused a routine screening that could have saved his life.
Almost as if he was choosing his own ending.
It's a chilling thought, and the reactions to his death were really telling.
House.
Well, Russ Coffey, the journalist, he expressed the sense of relief.
Like a weight had been lifted.
And he basically dismissed Nilsen's carefully crafted mythology, but for the victims' families,
Right.
the pain and anger were still very much present.
Of course, for them, the wounds were still fresh.
And even in death, the mystery surrounding Nilsen continued.
In what way?
Well, his cremation was shrouded in secrecy,
Oh, wow.
and the recipient of his ashes has never been revealed.
A fitting end, perhaps, to a life that was both mundane and monstrous.
Both captivating and utterly repellent.
A true enigma, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and it perfectly encapsulates the paradoxical nature of this entire case.
We're left with more questions than answers.
So much unresolved. I mean, with Nilsen himself being so unreliable, where do we even begin to understand what really happened?
Yeah, it's a real puzzle.
Like, what drove him to do these horrific things? What can we actually take away from all this?
Even if we don't have all the answers, cases like this force us to confront some hard truths about, well, human nature.
Right, like what makes someone capable of such brutality?
Our source material points out something pretty chilling,
What's that?
Nilsen was never even charged for 7 other suspected murders.
Oh, wow.
And those victims were never identified.
That's more lives lost, more families left wondering what happened to their loved ones.
Exactly. And it makes the whole tragedy even more immense.
It's easy to get caught up in the facts and the figures, but we can't forget that these were real people.
With their own stories, their own hopes and dreams.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is.
So was there ever a clear motive established?
Well, Brian Masters, the author of Killing for Company, suggests that Nilsen killed for companionship.
Like a twisted need for connection.
Yeah, he theorized that Nilsen craved someone to talk to, someone to care for.
It's a controversial theory, for sure.
Some people find it unsettlingly sympathetic.
But Shane Levine, whose father was one of the victims, he doesn't buy it.
No, he believes the driving force behind the murders was sexual.
And then you have journalist Russ Coffey, who proposes that Nilsen killed to feel powerful.
To compensate for his own insecurities, his own feelings of inadequacy.
So 3 very different theories, each offering a different glimpse into the darkness of Nilsen's mind.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
And disturbing.
Absolutely.
Even the police who investigated Nilsen, like Detective Chief Inspector Peter J., were baffled by him.
Yeah, he said he never really figured Nilsen out.
Never managed to put him neatly into a box.
It's a chilling thought, the idea that evil can be so elusive.
That there isn't always a clear-cut explanation for such depravity.
It's a reminder that the human mind is capable of both great good and great evil.
And that unsettling feeling seems to linger even after Nilsen's death.
In what way?
Well, think about it. The flat on Melrose Avenue where he killed 12 people,
Yeah.
it was eventually sold to a young couple who renovated it.
Could you imagine living there knowing what happened in those very rooms?
It's bone-chilling.
And then there's his kitchen from the Cranley Gardens flat.
Right.
It's on display in London's Crime Museum, the Black Museum.
A stark reminder of the horrors he inflicted.
It's a popular exhibit, apparently.
I read that the flat itself has changed hands multiple times over the years,
Right?
always selling for less than similar properties in the area.
It's like this dark cloud hanging over it.
A haunting legacy to carry.
And of course, his story continues to be told and retold in books, documentaries,
There's even an upcoming TV series called Des,
which aims to explore the crimes from different perspectives.
but it's causing quite a bit of controversy.
Yeah, some of the victims' families feel like it's exploiting their pain for entertainment.
Especially Billy Sutherland's family.
Right. They've been very vocal about the inaccurate portrayals of their brother in the media.
And then you have Shane Levine, who, as we discussed earlier, actually supports the release of Nilsen's unpublished autobiography.
He wants access to those raw, unfiltered thoughts, even if they're disturbing.
It's a really tricky ethical dilemma.
It is. How do we balance telling these stories without causing further harm?
Where do we draw the line?
It's a question that we, as a society, need to keep asking ourselves.
Especially as true crime continues to grow in popularity.
We have a responsibility to the victims and their families.
To make sure their stories are told with respect and sensitivity.
And to remember that these aren't just entertainment. These are real lives that were tragically cut short.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Dennis Nilsen,
The Muswell Hill murderer.
I think the most important question to ask ourselves is this.
What is it?
How can we balance our fascination with true crime with the responsibility to respect the victims and their stories?
It's a question worth pondering, for sure.
And maybe there isn't one right answer.
Maybe these stories aren't meant to comfort us, but to challenge us.
To force us to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
Perhaps the most unsettling takeaway from all of this is that there are no easy answers.
Right. We're left with a lingering sense of unease.
A stark realization of the darkness that resides within humanity,
A darkness that we can try to understand.
but never fully comprehend.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the disturbing world of the Muswell Hill murderer. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a fascinating, albeit unsettling journey.
We'll leave you to ponder the complex and unsettling legacy of a man who was both ordinary and extraordinary.
Both repulsive and strangely compelling.
A true enigma who continues to fascinate and horrify us to this day.